We're here to talk about, governments investing in alternative proteins. I think it's no secret that the federal government and state governments invest in a lot of things. There's a lot of R&D research, tax credits, things like that, into things like, transitioning away from fossil fuels. We all know about the, electric vehicle incentives and things like that. So, but I think there's been less focus on different food investments and especially alternative proteins, although we're going to talk about some of the things that the federal government is doing and also state governments, because there's actually a lot of activity happening that I think has flown under the radar a little bit. I think it's also timely to talk about public investment because we all know venture capital is getting harder and harder to come by. And so I think what I'm hearing is a lot of more conversation around how do you get alternative forms of funding into not just innovation, but also academia. How do you have a workforce to draw from? How do you make sure that science and R&D are being invested in a way that everyone can use the intellectual property and that it's not so locked down? So lots of dynamics at play here. We have a really great panel. We are part in-person, part virtual, part recorded. So bear with us here. So I'm going to introduce everyone, and then we're going to embark on a technological journey here. So first we have Sanah Baig right in the middle here. She is the Deputy Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics at USDA, which is a very important mission area. We also have Jay Fitzgerald right here, who is the Chief Scientist for the Bioenergy Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. A department I don't really cover, but it's cool to see, some cross-pollination here. And then we have Ash Kalra, an assembly member on the end here from California. Obviously, we're in California. So the California State Assembly represents the San Jose area and has been very active in this space and getting state funds for research. So we're going to talk about that. Then we have a pre-recorded message from Congresswoman Julia Brownley, also California representative. And then I believe we have Sonia Harper, who is a state representative for the Illinois House of Representatives, joining us virtually. We are hoping that Dan Wolgamott, a state representative from the Minnesota House of Representatives, is also joining us virtually, although I'm not sure that has happened yet. So we're going to stay tuned on that. And if not, I believe we have a pre-recorded video for him as a backup. So we are going to start with Congresswoman Brownley's opening statement, and then we'll have a panel discussion. We'll have plenty of time for questions and just pray for technology to work here. Go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to I'd like to welcome our panelists and audience and as well, because joining us tonight is good. So you find capitalizes for to build a sustainable economy and secure food system, one where alternative systems are no longer alternative, but not from a more system. Investing in the alternative food sector can significantly advance American climate goals that address the security and sustainability of our food system, while supporting economic growth and consumer functions. The U.S. is a global leader in science and innovation and constantly forefront of the alternative food space and research. I am proud of the award in particular belonging to the first major the first ever cultivated these products. As you all know, there is a remarkable relationship between something like possible beyond these which has led the way in that we do. And this data is very significant. as well as upside and taking the path forward in merging state and these calibrating are able. Alone, but multi-billion-dollar market that has already created tens of thousands of jobs for America. That is why I strongly believe we are at a critical juncture where we must have public investment fully unlock the value of this industry. Increasing federal and state level support for R&D and commercialization of our businesses to compete globally and help to ensure that the United States continues to lead the way in job creation. I have been working in Washington to continue the momentum in this issue, and I'm proud to be presenting the coaching center, which was allocated $150 million to establish research centers of excellence at universities focused on organic proteins, elevate their focus on federal research programs, and market development and manufacturing technology for as leaders, job creators, and innovators, you have an important role to play for the United States to lead the way in developing and supporting this new industry. That's why I'm asking you to speak with your members in Congress about the Protein Act, about the innovative work you are doing, and how companies are creating good green jobs across the country, and let them all know the reason the United States should be leading the way. We cannot ignore the urgent need to rethink our current approach to protein production. Given the high stakes of already the worst effects of environment, safely defeating a growing population, growing our economy, and expanding access to high-quality government, we must do more to advance this game-changing industry. The state and federal investment we can do to secure and sustainable food system, delivering nutritious food to all Americans. Thank you for being part of today's conference, and a very special thanks to the good news for hosting this important discussion. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the alternative person. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you. So glad that worked. I think we still have one panelist. Do we have two? We have at least one joining us via Zoom, which is great. So I want to start at the federal level today. I focus mostly on federal policy, although increasingly states are, well, I guess this is part of the American experiment. States are always pushing back on the feds, but there's been a lot of activity at the state level as Washington is like paralyzed. We're about to shut down the government. I don't know if you all knew that, but the government's probably going to shut down, right? So amid dysfunction, we looked at the states, but I'm going to start at the federal level today. So I'm going to start with you, Sanah. I don't know that everyone appreciates how much federal ag research does. My favorite factoid is that USDA Agricultural Research Service scientists invented the stuff you put on the outside of sliced apples so they don't turn brown, like useful stuff, right? That you don't think about the federal government investing in. There's plenty of other examples. That's just a cute one. Tell us what is happening at the federal level right now? Why now? Why is USDA? It seems like there's more happening on the all protein space. Like, where do you see things right now? Paint the picture for maybe folks in the room who aren't familiar.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. And I'm so glad to be here. And I appreciate that framing, because I think a lot of times people do underappreciate the value of public investment in R&D really across the board, right? Responsible for the internet, for example, semiconductors. From the ARS perspective, though, right, we're also responsible for the technology and diapers. So parents, you're welcome. You're welcome. But really, honestly, beyond that, we have in the United States, it was very clear early on, President Lincoln saw the vision that he knew that farmers needed innovation constantly to remain productive and profitable and resilient. And so the launch of the land grant university system happened at the same time as the launch of the USDA. So research and agriculture department, those have grown together. I also want to note that ARS has been, a leader in plant research for a long time, fermentation. We have scientists that have been looking, of course, at our commodity crops, but also looking broadly across the board at other types of crops that can be used for a variety of purposes, and doing things like, bio-based materials, soil health. But the framing, I think, is new, right? And so when I talk to scientists, and I don't know if any of our ARS folks are here today, it reminds me that we have a lot of education to do. And when I was sitting in the secretary's office in 2016, there was no concept of alternative proteins. So it was actually really incredible that we've gotten to a point within, 7 years within the Department of Agriculture that we're now talking about alternative protein, specifically research projects. Back in the early 2000s, probably the mid 2000s, my favorite example actually in the alt protein environment is that Ethan Brown read a scientific journal, an article about ARS research around pea protein extrusion. So new research that came out for ARS that inspired Beyond Meat. And so ARS has actually been inspiring, work in this space for a very long time. But the Secretary of Livestock coming back this time around has been very clear that over the past 70 years, we've created a system in agriculture that has really focused on productivity, and at really the expense of farm income and profitability for the many and the most instead of just the few. So alternative proteins really are an opportunity to create wealth for producers, right? We're creating new and better markets across the board, thinking about organic, thinking about bio-based, and alternative proteins really fit within that strategy to make sure that rural communities and agricultural producers have an opportunity to thrive in an environment where very few producers are actually profitable. Beyond that, this really fits into our food security strategy, right? We know, right? It's clear, everybody talks about it. We need to double protein production by 2050 to be able to feed the world. And we need conventional agricultural, production, livestock to also, continue innovating on how they're mitigating greenhouse gas reductions. And we need to make sure that we're supplementing protein supply in really, really innovative ways. So those have been some of the key drivers to helping our scientists, both within ARS, but also through NIFA, which is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Yeah, which is our extramural funding agency. And we give out about $2 billion every year to the land grant university system to do a wide variety of research. And so we're just kind of getting started. I was giving the analogy earlier that now I feel like we've got our backpack on, our hiking shoes. We know we got to get up to the mountain, but we're up to the task now and really kind of hyper focused on how do we, move toward also cell-cultivated, thinking about opportunities for collaboration there, as well as fermentation, again, because we have a lot of that technological expertise.
Yeah, you make a good point just around there having been a lot of science already done in adjacent or directly applicable work, but it wasn't explicitly called out. Like, I think seeing the federal government put alt protein into like strategy documents or science plans, or I know you have different names for all these amazing, huge reports you put out, that has seemed to be a real vibe shift in terms of just really laying it out as a priority on paper, is what I'm seeing. Is sort of the
Yeah,
difference.
I mean, and that's, again, as I mentioned yesterday, it's because of everybody here at the Good Food Conference, GFI, a range of stakeholders that have been very clear that, hey, we are trying to build a complementary sector. We're trying to, enable climate smart agriculture, food, innovation and security, and we're listening. And so, the White House, through the Bioeconomy Executive Order listening sessions, invited stakeholders to come. And we were so pleased to get a ton of feedback, really meaningful feedback from stakeholders in this community. And so, our job is to listen and learn and to respond. And so really is a reflection of how quickly this particular sector is growing, and how engaged they are really in public policy and really focused on R&D in particular, which is great to see. You don't really see that in a lot of parts of the food system.
That is very true. And also as a reporter, I'm seeing way more new companies show up, new associations form. It feels like there's just a lot. I mean, there just is a lot more activity compared to several years ago. Okay, so Jay, I'm going to go to you next. And I promise we're going to get to the states doing awesome things. But you're also part of the federal government. But DOE, I don't think people think of the Department of Energy doing a lot of food and ag stuff. Like, why are you here? What are you doing?
That's a great question. You invited me next.
What are you working on? And maybe start for this room. I don't know a lot of people even know what DOE does. So maybe give us a 30,000-foot view, and then just what are you working on that's food and ag related?
Sure. Well, yeah, very happy to be here and be talking with you all at a conference focused on food from the Department of Energy. And that does seem, I think, strange to a lot of people, but hopefully I can break down sort of why we're here and what our interest in the space is. So the Department of Energy has a lot of different R&D operations in it. I come from the Bioenergy Technologies Office, which is an applied R&D office within DOE. We also have the Office of Science, which does more basic research, and a variety of other agencies that engage across the whole spectrum of fundamental to applied research. Our biggest mission within DOE is in energy and the environment. And I think the food sector is kind of, you can't decouple the food sector from the mission in energy and the environment. So the more that we learn about the ways that we can use our biomass resources in the United States, which is what my office focuses on, the more that I think that these two concepts are linked. And we recently, in May, as a part of that Bioeconomy Executive Order, put out a bold goals for biotechnology report for climate and energy. And one of those bold goals was around the agricultural sector and alternative proteins and the kind of climate impacts that might be able to have. So I think when you take a really unbiased look at where our biggest sources of emissions are that we don't know how to mitigate, the agricultural industry pops out as something where we need novel solutions, and we're hopeful that this industry can be a part of that. My office primarily focuses on things that you're probably all familiar with, like biofuels or bio-based products, bio-based materials. But these are all just ways that we can use our biomass carbon to solve the needs that we're going to have in a highly electrified, highly decarbonized future, and we're going to need carbon in our food system for a very long time. Always. Yeah, so
you can't get by without it.
You can't get by without it. And it's the same for a lot of materials like plastics and other things. So we see this as another outlet for biomass carbon that we can do in a really carbon efficient, or that we can produce in a carbon efficient manner to help tackle our climate change. Our obligation to do something about climate change.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I love to see different, silos being broken down between federal agencies. That's great. Okay, now we're going to dive into the states. We're going to bring in Representative Sonia Harper. Are you here? Can we make her screen bigger real quick? Can you make the Zoom? Perhaps. Yeah, there we go. Okay, we can see you. We have feedback, but can you hear me?
Everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, we can. We might turn. Okay, so no. So Representative Harper, you're chair of a really key committee in the Illinois State Legislature, which I understand, I did not know this, is very active in the alternative protein space. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in Illinois, and what's driving that work? Hopefully we don't have feedback.
Sure. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for inviting me to be part of the conversation. As stated, I am chair of the House Agriculture Committee in the Illinois House of Representatives, where we have some exciting developments within our state's alternative protein ecosystem. I want to first of all thank the Good Food Institute for being such a support and for their advocacy on our Alternative Protein Innovation Task Force. I'm proud to say that we are the first task force in the nation. The Alternative Protein Innovation Task Force Act created the opportunity for agricultural leaders from across the state to study alternative proteins, as well as evaluate opportunities that this emerging field can offer our state. This task force will be comprised of state legislators, as well as experts on economic development, food security, and of course, alternative protein science. So during the fall of this year, we are looking forward to the task force meeting to discuss the economic, environmental, and health benefits of the alternative protein industry, as well as how we can make the necessary public investments to grow the industry. I am looking forward to the policy recommendations that will come from this task force. And when I just think about the long-term impact of their work, I'm excited when I think about it ushering in the next chapter of agricultural innovation in the state, enabling us to create new markets, new jobs, and new opportunities for rural communities and urban centers alike, potentially positioning our state as a model for the nation and hopefully a global leader in protein innovation. Just quickly, I just wanted to say that I'm really excited about the support for the alternative protein sector, how that means support for Illinois farmers, right, who can grow the crop inputs for these products, and the potential for jobs, as well as the economic benefit. I just wanted to add before closing that we did try to get through a proposal through the Senate and through the House that would have appropriated $2 million in funds to the Department of Agriculture to give a grant to an Illinois higher education institution's integrated bioprocessing research laboratory. So that the aim there was to support the expansion of alternative protein research and development and further foster growth in the industry, which would have been one step in illustrating our state's dedication to sustainable food solutions. However, we will be back at the table trying to pass that again in the future. So again, I want to thank you for having me today. Looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Great, thank you. Wonderful, thank you. We'll definitely come back and talk more about this task force because I want to hear more about that. But we are going to turn to California here. Ash, it's my understanding that you played a very key role in getting some state funding to the UC system to work on some of these issues. Can you talk about how that came about, what the fruits of that labor have been? Just kind of brief the room because I'm not sure everyone's super aware that that happened. I was not aware. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's been a great journey. It's actually great to hear from colleagues from Illinois and other states that are kind of working in parallel on this. And so working with the Good Food Institute, we recognize the need to have buy-in and buy-in from the state, especially in California. California, the fourth largest economy in the world, largest agricultural sectors, accounts for about 12% of the output in the country, about half of fruits, nuts, and vegetables, the biggest dairy producing state. It's not Wisconsin, it's California. And so not only is that important to our economy, but the impacts of those industries have on the environment, on energy, on water, are also affecting our state. And so we went forward with a $5 million budget request that I led. And the way that it works, the GFI and I sat down and said, okay, let's make this request, but then we have to get the governor on board as well as some of our legislative leadership. And so we did, a lot of it is just educating our colleagues. And I think even right now, our 120 colleagues, I think most of them don't even know that this happened, and that's okay. Because we have more room to educate and to grow, to get more colleagues on board. But I did take colleagues on different educational kind of trips. We did go to Upside Foods with a few of my colleagues. All those colleagues signed on to the letter as well that we made the request to the administration. Our legislative leadership on both sides also expressed support. The governor's economic development lead, Dee Myers, went to Upside Foods. So that was huge for her also to have the opportunity to brief the governor on why it's so important for us. You know, California is leading the nation. We have more companies here innovating here. Our UCs are already world-class research facilities. They should be leading on this as well. And so getting $5 million for UC Davis, Berkeley, and UCLA to actually start their programs. This year we were going to try to go for another 5 million, but we had a budget deficit. But you can be sure that in the years to follow that we're going to be coming back for 5 million and even more. And it really, you know, the funding in total, when you think about the food industry and even the alternative protein industry, is a drop in the bucket. But I think by showing that investment from the state, by having research done at our universities, that buy-in kind of triggers the market. It tells investors that this is a direction that we're going to continue to go in. California did it with electric vehicles and so many other industries as well. When the federal government gives tax credits, or when we talk about the federal partnership, all the money that they're putting into climate change and infrastructure money. Well, collectively together, academics, researchers, private sector investors, media, and those in public leadership, whether it's civil servants or those that are elected officials, we all have to kind of be moving in that same direction and urging both our local governments and whether it's in Sacramento or federal government in DC, let them know that by investing in alternative protein, it's not only necessary in terms of the environmental impact and sustainability, it's about jobs. It's about economic development as well. That, you know, the thing about folks in leadership, particularly elected officials, you have to get at them from different angles. Some of them, okay, well, maybe you can do it with the animals, probably a small percentage. A much bigger percentage you can get with the environmental impact, and even a bigger percentage you can get with economic development and job growth. This will create jobs in your district. And I can say that about a lot of my legislative colleagues in California, because there are so many companies, so much research being done at universities, so many companies are innovating that is literally creating tens of thousands of jobs here in California. That starts to pique their interest. If you couple that with the climate benefits, you couple that with the benefits of reduction of use of water and energy. So there's a lot more work to do, and we do have other initiatives that we do that are, you know, kind of work in parallel. I introduced a bill 80-30-30 to protect 30% of our land and water by 2030. Well, if we want to do that, we have to think different about our food systems. And so when we talk about having legislation to combat tropical deforestation, again, if we do that, we have to think about our food systems. As others were saying, like, you know, it's all interconnected. But everybody in this room, everyone at this conference plays a role in that continual push. And it definitely helps me the next time I go and say, hey, I want $10 million or $20 million, or I want to create, you know, different. We don't have a task force, we do have a working group. I created an alternative protein working group in legislature. But if we want to more formalize that and get buy-in and have the investment from our state and have the governor buy-in, it's not one legislator that asks for it. It's all of us that kind of push for it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I was not aware of the funding in particular, but you mentioned some of the political arguments that helped move that forward. But did you ever find, was there pushback? Because I think there's a lot of, well, first of all, a lot of people, it was good that you reminded us all, California is the #1 ag state, like in the country. People forget that. It's a massive industry. Yeah, it's not even close. And it's, yeah, but we could go on forever about why people don't recognize that. But did you have political pushback? Because sometimes there can be some sort of political fighting over all proteins being seen as adversarial against, livestock or meat interests. Like, did you deal with any of that, or was this a small enough amount of money in the scheme of the world and ag and research to not be seen as adversarial?
It was absolutely adversarial, and a lot of the wordsmithing has to go into it. But over the years, I mean, there's been different, in fact, with GFI as well, you can see this common theme here. There was legislation I proposed to help small family farms transition from meat and dairy to plant-based, because a lot of them would make more money being plant-based, but it's that transition cost because they've been cattle ranchers for 4 generations. It's not easy just to all of a sudden flip their ranch into, soy or, avocados, whatever it is they want to make or plant. But that got so much opposition from the meat industry and the dairy industry that we couldn't even get a hearing in our ag committee because only 2 of the members were even showed remote interest in supporting it. When I introduced a bill to ban dissection in our schools, massive pushback, even from the pork industry, because they sell the fetuses to the schools. I mean, it is rampant how much pushback that we get. In this case, part of it was because the amount was relatively small. Part of it was when it's done through a budget ask, it's a little easier. It doesn't make it easy, but it's easier than legislation that has to go through all the committees. Because a lot of our budget asks or our ultimate final budget, we're going to get, Republicans are going to vote against it every time and Democrats are going to vote for it pretty much every time. The good news is 3/4 of our legislature are Democrats. Now, some of them are also very much connected to these industries that push back. So it doesn't mean that that what we're doing is easy. But I think the more and more attention that's put onto the emissions aspect of it, the water usage aspect of it, I think it makes it, again, it continues to build that momentum. And we even had, I think other states have dealt with the fact that have dealt with industry trying to keep plant-based products from using the word meat or milk or things of that nature. We pushed back against that and were able to beat that back. But I know there are other states that are still contending with that issue. So there's no doubt, even with a lot of the, talking about media, a lot of the stories that come out talking about, oh, this plant-based is so processed, ignoring the fact of how, ground beef is processed, right? Or the chemicals in it. A lot of that we've seen over the years, the fossil fuel industry. We've seen it with the tobacco industry. We've certainly seen it with dairy over the years. I'm going to continue to see it. So we have to be ready for the next 10, 20 years of massive amounts of money, billions in lobbying, massive amounts, tens of billions, if not more, in marketing campaigns and research that's going to push back on everything that we're trying to do because we know that we must do it really to save ourselves, but also because it's the right thing to do.
So I want to go back to the feds here just for a second. How much do you think the state activity here helps? Like, does it make your jobs easier? Do you think that more like federal agencies will look at investing, or does it help the conversation that the states are jumping in here a little bit more?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always wonderful to see our state partners proving out models that could work and partnerships that could work, right? When I think about that investment within the UC system, it's tremendous. And it is very complementary to the type of funding that USDA provides to our land grant institutions. So I think, it's playing an important role in building that capacity in terms of the research infrastructure and next generation that we need. And so, of course, USDA looks at that, and those researchers and programs then become even more competitive for federal funding. So from that point of view, it's really important and very catalytic. It's brand new, so I'm learning a lot already on this panel from what's happening in the states, but certainly we're paying attention. And certainly, we have an important stakeholder group in NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, who also, come together and share with USDA some of their priorities. So it will be interesting to see how, you might interact with Commissioner Ross, for example, and share some of those priorities through those channels. But certainly we're paying close attention, and states they're federal stakeholders as well, right? They're some of our most important stakeholders. So sure, but a lot more to come, I think, in terms of what California is doing. And I would love to hear what Minnesota is doing too.
Yeah. Did we ever get Minnesota on the? No. Okay. But we're going to do that at the end. Okay. We're going to do a couple minutes of pre-record there too. Something was bound to go awry. It's okay. But what about you, Jay? Do you think this helps to have states becoming active on this? Because it is a newer trend.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo all the points that were made here. I mean, it's only can help the whole situation. I was just over in Berkeley yesterday at a commercializing industrial biotech conference, and it's funny to see some of the same folks that were over there are here today, and these two sectors need. I mean, the energy push from biotech and the food and alt protein push from biotech need to grow together. And I think by priming some of that investment at places like Berkeley, when we are able to run programs at the federal level, they'll have capabilities there, they'll have capacity to be familiar with the work. So I think that's all to the good.
Awesome. I want to bring Representative Harper back in if we can through the Zoom portal, if it will work. I want to learn a little bit more about this task force because it's very, very unique. Well, to have a state legislature's ag committee, as we just discussed, can be a little touchy. So to take that on and then also to put something together that has a lot of leaders on it. Can we get her back in? Perhaps? Can you hear us? Can you beam in? Did you hear my question?
I'm sorry, I was having some technical difficulties. Please.
Oh, no
repeat
worries,
it.
no worries. I'll repeat. I was just explaining to the room that it's very unique to have an ag committee, a state legislature's ag committee, lean in on this issue. And we were hoping you could tell us a little bit more about the task force, like who's on it, how did you select the leaders for it, and what are the like near-term outcomes you're hoping to get from it?
Sure. So the bill was just passed and signed into law. So I don't think it's fully been staffed yet, but usually our task force will be comprised of state legislators, but as well as experts on economic development, experts on food security, and of course, those experts on alternative protein science. And so again, we're looking forward to during the fall of this year when the task force is fully been seated by the governor to meet to discuss the economic, environmental, and health impacts of the alt protein industry and how we can make the necessary investments to grow.
And then as a follow-up on that, sorry about that, go guys. Did you have controversy over this in Illinois? Was there controversy over the idea of setting up a task force?
I didn't experience any controversy. Now, I didn't actually carry the bill myself. My colleague did in the House, Representative Lakeisha Collins, who's now a senator, and then my senator, Senator Hunter, and I did not hear of any. I know that I was a little bit discouraged that the bill didn't come through my committee, but you know, as someone who's always fighting for local healthy food systems and innovation in agriculture, this is something that I definitely took an interest in and want to help to further develop how the states provides its recommendations on it and then help to pass the necessary legislation and funding to support it and help it grow.
I saw that Upside Foods just selected, I believe it's a suburb north of Chicago for their big plant. I can't remember what the timeline is for that. So are you seeing that resonate with Illinois leaders, just the economic development part?
Yes. I think that we are open in Illinois to definitely using our food production and innovation in the ag industry to help with economic development, again, in rural areas and especially in urban areas where food security and economic development is a serious issue.
Yeah, very interesting. Ash, I want to come back to you and talk about constituents and sort of what you hear, if anything, from your constituents on these issues. Is it, I mean, it sounds like it's a personal passion and you're very interested in these. To what extent do you hear from voters on alt protein? Is this one of the issues that comes up, or is it a little bit early, you think?
I think it's early. I probably hear about it more than most, just because being vegan and working in this space, and I kind of randomly probably just I don't think I'm the data point.
They're selecting
compared to the other
Yeah,
119 legislators. But I think it's early. I think that that's part of the education process. I do think what we do hear about is issues regarding climate, regarding water, regarding energy. And I think those are the entry points that make a lot of sense for our constituents. For example, and I mentioned this in the opening yesterday with our bill that the governor is committed to sign SB 253 that's going to have corporate accountability on their emissions. A reason why industry kind of had to come to the table and work through it and not just go full force oppose it like they might be able to do on other issues, like the fossil fuel industry, unfortunately, is able to still be pretty successful on some of our bills, is because the general public, 80, 90% polling in favor. And so I think that they understand that they want to know how much the companies that they're buying products from, or the companies they're working for, are contributing to the issue that they care so deeply about. So I think there are entry points that are adjacent to alternative proteins, whether it's healthier foods, certainly sustainability, that our constituents care deeply about. And so I think there's absolutely an opportunity for us to take advantage of what they're already thinking about, and doing some kind of slight pivot to why it's important for us to look at our food systems generally. And then a lot of the conversation that's been happening today and yesterday, how do we actually use our brain power? How do we use our long-term planning to get us in the right direction? Because we do have to double our food consumption. And I think folks care, folks understand, especially with all the wildfires and everything, the floods that have been happening, they now know now more than ever that we have to do something far more dramatic than we have done in combating climate change. They don't necessarily, you'll see ads all over the place where the fossil fuel industry right now, if you're in a hotel and put on the TV, and you're going to see they're advertising like crazy on how much California politicians are raising their cost of gas, or we're importing foreign oil, because there's a sensitivity to everyone's daily life on, okay, my gas went up $1 or $2. However, on this issue, it's really hard. It's much harder for them to combat it in that type of style. And so they're going to continue to use their more traditional way of killing things, going to the legislature, spending a lot of money, independent expenditures, filling people's campaign coffers. And it doesn't help that out of 120 legislators, I'm one of only 2 that takes no corporate PAC money. And so that's the other thing, is that the general public needs to really pay attention to how their policymakers are being influenced as well.
Yeah, for sure. Representative Harper, I see you nodding vigorously in agreement. Do you have anything you want to add in terms of what you hear from voters on these issues? Does anyone write letters to talk to you at meet and greets about these issues?
When you're talking about sustainability, when you're talking about, mitigations for climate change, those things are what's important for voters. And I just, was really agreeing with the speaker on some of the points that he was making. They're absolutely true. And so, yes, while a lot of people not yet are talking about alternative proteins, they are talking about the issues that surround it, right? And they're talking about sometimes the arguments for it. And I think that helps with the education and outreach and the expansion of this industry as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think food has often lagged in terms of political organization, I think. I mean, you don't see food and ag questions at the presidential debates, for example. These are not, so it's definitely a little behind. Although in my experience, there's a big audience and there is a lot of interest. It's just, it's lagged some of the other political issues. I want to go back to the feds here just for a minute. I think we now have alt protein as a formal part of, I'm going to butcher what the document, there's an executive order that crosses agencies. And then also, part of I think it's the USDA science plan or
Science and research strategy.
Science and research strategy. You should go look
Close.
it up. Riveting reading. Lots of really interesting.
It actually
is. Yeah. I'm not joking. But to have those things formally acknowledged, alt protein, like what is that? Was that hard to do, I guess, first of all? And because we've talked a little bit about how the state politics can be tough. And do you think that going forward, it is something that'll stick in future administrations? I don't want to get too political. I know you've got your career people, but is this sort of going to become a more institutionalized at the federal level, do you think? Because we're in early days still.
I'm optimistic because there's so many stakeholders that are excited about this, and our scientists are excited as well. Like I mentioned, we have plant scientists that have a lot of expertise in these areas, and they want to be as relevant as possible, right? So if they can see their work contributing to all of these goals that we're talking about, it's ultra motivating for them. If new and emerging scientists and folks who can, contribute to the sector see that USDA is paying attention, is investing, that's a huge draw for us as well. I was talking to somebody actually from UC Davis yesterday who said talking to professors at that university, there is nothing that they're hearing from students about more than opportunities, interest in alternative proteins. It's a huge draw. And she said some of the professors in 20 years have never seen this much excitement. We want to harness that energy. We want to bring it into the department. And so we're hoping that, you know, these baby steps, these early steps that we're taking to think about how do we integrate these topics into our overarching, very, you know, widespread agricultural research agenda, we think that that will pay dividends. I think the other thing I want to note too is, you know, that Secretary Vilsack, initially, when we were going through COVID, we came in, you know, under the Biden administration during a really tough time. We did get historic money to support the conventional sector to make sure that we could have a safe, abundant food supply. And the secretary has invested a lot into local and regional meat and poultry processing. And it was incredibly important to make sure that we could fight consolidation in that sector and promote more profitability for small and mid-sized producers. In addition to that, we know that we need to continue to expand all options. And so he has pushed us to think about equity, not just in terms of all the ways that I think we traditionally think about equity, but equity in our research. What types of research? Who is at the table? What types of questions are we asking? And so to me, this also fits very squarely within, you know, that lens and that approach of, you know, we need to be thinking differently about the types of research questions we're asking, even at ERS, even at our Human Nutrition Research Center,
Economic Research
Service,
yeah.
you know, and so it's,
Which also has really important and interesting reports.
that's
that
a
you
whole
should look up.
separate
There's an app,
conversation.
too. There's actually a great app, not to totally sidetrack us. ERS has an app.
Charts of Note app.
It's called Charts of Note, and it has the best charts. They're fascinating. You really should get it.
Thank you
anyway.
for that plug, Helena. I
Yeah.
appreciate
I'm
that.
not like exaggerating. It's really interesting.
So, you know, I think that there is a lot of momentum within USDA. I also want to, you know, thank and shout out the federal family, including energy, including the State Department, who we've been increasingly talking with them about, you know, food security is national security and really thinking about partnerships to deliver sustainable protein efficiently and effectively all over the world. And then how do we continue to build local capacity, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia. And so, you know, all of those entry points are really important. I think to me, give me hope and optimism that this will continue, whatever it might be called, however it might be framed. We know that, you know, we'll continue to need, conventional agriculture production, and we'll need to supplement that. And so it's been really fun to talk to the federal family and even folks like commerce, who you might not think about traditionally, thinking about, hey, would an advanced manufacturing institute on alternative proteins make sense? So just the number of federal partners coming to us, I think, means that there is a lot of awareness and drive, not just within USDA, but across the board to do something game-changing here.
I was actually just talking to someone from the University of Arkansas. I don't know if they're here or not, but they were saying they applied for a commerce grant that was for economic development, and they were doing alt protein as like part of making the national security sort of economic security competitiveness argument. I don't know if they'll get it, but it's interesting to see the different agencies have pots of money and different things moving. Do you think that alt protein work will grow at DOE or continue? I mean, it sounds like it's early days still.
Yeah, definitely early days. I do think the Bioeconomy Executive Order has brought together a lot of different federal agencies and helped this conversation move forward. And I think that's a great first step in working with our colleagues at USDA on that Bold Goals report and on these other reports. You know, coming to a common understanding in this space has been really impactful for forward directions. I think for DOE in particular, you know, where I see us playing the biggest role is, you know, as the sector grows, keeping climate, you know, first and foremost in people's minds when they're designing new products and when they're figuring out where to source their raw materials to help this industry, and making sure that those are sustainably sourced and done in as low carbon intensity a manner as possible. I think if we're not part of that conversation from the beginning, you know, things can take a very different tack. You may not ultimately end up with a sector that would address climate change in the same way that it would, had that been the guiding star from the very beginning. And so I'm optimistic that we can keep that piece of the conversation moving from DOE, as well as, you know, use the capabilities at our national laboratories to help further those building block type compounds that go into these different sources of alternative proteins. I think we have huge fermentation capabilities, across the national laboratories, across the DOE workspace that can be harnessed to point in this direction and build off of a strong baseline that's also been established by USDA sort of in the space. We did run our very first alternative protein solicitation as part of a small business innovative research grant this past year. Just a very small amount of money, but at least,
What's very small?
a first
Okay.
step. Those, for most of the phase ones for small business innovative research are about $200,000, and then they move up in phase 2 to about $1 million.
You've been in Washington too long. You're saying 200,000.
Sorry, yeah.
It is in terms of federal grants, but that's like a meaningful, for
Right. We're hopeful that
yeah.
can provide some meaningful starting
Yeah.
point for people to start,
Yeah.
thinking about this and engaging, more importantly, engaging with the Department of
Yeah.
Energy, in this space.
Yeah, I'm only giving you a hard time, but you do start to get a warped sense of spending when you're in that town. Can we try to bring in, I want to get to the remarks that we have from the Minnesota Rep Dan Walgamot, if you could bring that up. Oh, there we go. Easy peasy. We're gonna do this briefly, and then we're gonna take questions from the audience. So think about any questions you have for these panelists. Great expertise here. So get your juices flowing. Can we go ahead?
Hello, my name is Dan Walgamot, and I'm a Minnesota State Representative for District 14 in the Minnesota area. And I am so proud and excited to be the author of Introducing Lucrative Agriculture in the New Technologies Act, or the Plan Act, as I like to call it. And this is a piece of legislation that I've been very excited for here in Minnesota. So I want to share with you. I think it's a good guiding path for what our state governments can do to coordinate against the plant-based protein industry. So my legislation would create opportunities for Minnesota farmers, businesses, and consumers through plant-based food research and development. Now, this is going to create opportunities for farmers to add income streams and diversify their protein supply. And we know this is a good idea here in Minnesota because we're going to have this big from the growing plant-based industry. And this legislative goal, which is to enhance that research and be able to build off of that success. There's going to be consumer demand for plant-based foods, and we need to create more food options for everyone. That's what we need about. In addition to food options, it's about stimulating the economy by creating more jobs. We see studies that show that every dollar invested in agriculture research creates $20 in economic activity. Plant-based foods are a $7 billion industry in the U.S. And the plant-based food market is growing at twice the rate of overall food sales. And so far, the plant-based food industry has created more than 55,000 jobs in the U.S. And if we move forward legislation like the Plan Act in Minnesota and other states, we can create hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs and proper investment. So that's why I'm putting this forward. I know that it's going to be a real benefit for consumers, for businesses, for farmers. We've already taken significant steps towards funding that research in Minnesota, and now's a chance for us as a state of Minnesota and for all the states around the U.S. to step up and lead the emerging plant-based foods industry. And I look forward to partnering with each and every one of you to make that a reality. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, what we lacked in Zoom connection, we made up in enthusiasm, I think. And I mean, this has been interesting for me. I did not know this much was going on at the state level. So really interesting to learn. Does anyone have questions? I could go on all day. We have lots of great. Bruce in the back. Oh, no, you get a host privilege, right?
Really,
Oh.
But so far, what we found is in the Trump Secretary of Agriculture, study produced Maxwell Canyon on our one picture for members of Congress. Quote from study produced the biggest thing there. Scott Hadley also a chap that achieved in the late Festival Rock Florida achieved in. So I'm curious to hear from the ones to address it. Like I think so far it feels like this is state agriculture works. I think that JBS, Iceland, Cargill, and the data industry, like also seeing this as an economic opportunity. How should we be like? How how can we keep this bipartisan? We believe it is. And use that framing that we can see 83 million jobs, $1.1 trillion to the global economy, like that sort of framing. How much should we prioritize that versus prioritizing like climate benefits?
I don't know who wants to jump in. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think when I think from the USDA perspective, right, we have a mandate to support producers, right? That's a key function of the Department of Agriculture. We also have obviously key mandate to support consumers and be responsive to consumers. We also have multiple missions, obviously, but a key mandate to support rural development and rural communities. And so, that it's been really fascinating to see and to hear when I was here in May and also had a chance to tour some of these really groundbreaking companies, at pilot scale, them talking about at commercial scale, wanting to locate in the heartland and looking at more, economically competitive areas where it would make sense and they could have the draw from technical experts, land grant universities that are there. They could put, metal in the ground. They would have a bunch of different advantages. And I do think that message will become even more compelling over time as we see announcements like what we have seen with Upside and others. I think it's critically important. I think we need to begin uplifting the people at these companies that are really doing cool jobs. They have cool jobs. They have a lot of talent. A lot of these companies, one of them had like a former Olympian, right? Just really, really fascinating people that are drawn to this, and they're willing to move to these communities and they want to build roots into these communities as well. I think that's really important. I also wanted to just go back and say the global competition element of this is really interesting because I think obviously we're paying attention to what the states are doing. We're of course paying attention to all of the momentum happening all over the world. It was such a fantastic conversation this morning by the GFI team from all over the world. And we don't want to fall behind either, right? From the United States perspective, we have the land, we have the inputs, we have the manufacturing capacity, we have the research community and the scientists. It would be a shame. It would be a shame if we fell behind and if we didn't, maintain our status as top in the field and, hopefully continuing to be the top exporter over time for alternative proteins as well. So that's the other element. And of course, collaboration is a part of that through Aim for Climate, right? Where there is a big innovation sprint on alternative proteins. We know that there are some basic questions that need to be answered and, scientific partnerships will be important. But then beyond that specialization that will need to, kind of happen and ensure that the U.S. kind of industry and sector can stay here. Because I am worried when I hear about companies saying, well, we're talking to the Middle East, we're talking to other, that is worrying. And I think we need to be paying closer attention to that.
Yeah, that's what I heard in terms of what really resonated with Secretary of Agriculture Perdue was this, don't let America fall to China's investing heavily. This is part of their strategic science and innovation work. And and I think that is bipartisan, right? The maintaining world dominance or whatever our MO is here. Yeah,
I think
it's true though. Yeah,
I think there will be a lot of at the state level. It'll still be very partisan. When I think about especially in a place like California, a lot of the research and a lot of the companies, they're located in more blue areas and the farmland is more red areas. And ultimately there's going to be a lot of pushback as we see oftentimes from cattle ranchers. And even when I do a plant-based resolution, a lot of the legislators from those areas, Republicans, even some of the Democrats don't support it because they're cattle ranchers and they're big, it's really their big manufacturers don't support it. But I do think that there's still, when you see the big companies investing, they know that their model is not sustainable. And so that's a really good sign for the long term. In the short term, though, I think we have to continue to focus on jobs. I agree when they're doing advanced manufacturing or research, when they're actually opening up facilities, it's great if they can open up in traditionally agriculture communities to create jobs. Because we have, I chair our state assembly labor and employment committee. And so we have to think about the jobs, about the people working in meat processing plants, the people working at cattle ranches. We got to think about those workers as well as those that are in research facilities and doing the R&D. We have to have a path forward for the farm workers as well as for the farmers that are currently, making their living feeding into, the meat cattle egg industry and all that. And so that's why it's so complicated. But it's complicated also because we're in the very beginning. I mean, everyone here, this is, kind of groundbreaking stuff. We don't know where it's going to lead to. We know where we have to get to. And so that's where the political perils are going to be difficult. But I think ultimately in the whole scheme of things, they'll be short term.
I want to make sure we take a couple more questions. Okay, we're going to go with you all the way behind the column. Yes, just project. Oh, that was the one I was going to go to next. So good. I'm glad you're here.
Have
Yeah.
any comments on what we as scientists, enthusiasts, students, research, and more can do to get state legislation aware of all proteins, and then also encourage funding to state universities and local companies, and then particularly for states where livestock products are a dominant export?
I would just say, I mean, you have to, we hear, as you can imagine, from people all the time, from companies, what have you, you have to have your voice be heard. I would suggest creating some kind of group amongst different academic institutions of students, professors, of researchers that is focused on this issue and the larger food system issue in general, and then use that group to amplify the voice of the individuals. But reach out to the legislators, there are universities throughout the entire state, obviously. Reach out to every legislator, not just the ones that signed on to the budget letter and all that, the ones that may not be as aware, that may be more easily kind of pulled in a different direction. But it's going to take, it takes all of us, and it's going to definitely take a lot of really good organization, a lot of good organizing to make it very clear what direction you want to see, and your fellow researchers and students, what direction you want to see the state, respective state go, whether it's California or anywhere else.
Yeah, great question. Right here. We'll go front row.
I think we all know the true cost of animal agriculture. Of course, both state and federal government subsidizes production of protein quite heavily. What can we do to make sure that states and federal governments can subsidize these companies that are very early stage, will not be profitable, and never get any of the tax breaks for many cycles of funding to invest in the innovation that needs to happen now?
Well, I can't.
Small issue.
Right. It's just right. I can only really speak to this from the research perspective, right? Which, we're the reason why we have public funding for things like, agricultural R&D is because it's for the public good, right? And we want to make sure we're not, here to necessarily invest in individual companies, but to grow entire new sectors and industries. So we want to make sure that we continue to drive forward innovations in new and emerging areas that can then spur, a lot more innovation in things like alternative protein. So I think it's really important to have, direction and feedback, for example, through our upcoming stakeholder sessions that we'll be doing on the USDA Science and Research Strategy, to say, hey, you guys have this really great portfolio of funding, these really great opportunities like through AFRI, that, Agricultural Food Research Initiative, which is the biggest grants program for agricultural research in the country through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Hey, is this eligible? Hey, can we support research, development, and deployment through this program? So I would just say the more that you engage with us and say, hey, we need a lot more help from ARS, we need a lot more support through our land grant system and the immense research technical expertise, the more that we can listen and work with Congress to say, this is what we're hearing from our stakeholders. Congress directs, tells USDA what to do. They give us the money, but that conversation is really important to say, oh, we didn't actually quite know. We didn't think about that. Okay, that's something that potentially, I know Congresswoman Brownlee, for example, they're hearing in the process of creating the Farm Bill right now. So that type of conversation is really, really important. And I just, can't emphasize enough just the importance of the Farm Bill and the fact that, it's still in the process of being developed. So
It's early.
your voices are really, really important in that.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk about the Farm Bill much because, the government's about to shut down, and then the Farm Bill would be some time after that. So it is, it's actually expiring in September 30th, but Washington is such a hot mess that that's not going to happen. But I am hearing a lot more just in terms of conversation and advocacy around getting more Farm Bill resources to go to things like research or, now we have what is the Innovation Institute at Tufts?
The National Institute for Cellular Agriculture.
Yeah, so like things like that, so there is some early movement, I think, to try to get some Farm Bill resources, but you have to remember that all of these groups, all of these commodity groups, meat groups, soy, corn, every single commodity you can imagine is lobbying on this. If anyone reads Politico Influence, this is a newsletter all about lobbying. And last week they just had like a whole rundown. There's like 700 different groups lobbying on the Farm Bill, just to give you a sense of sort of the frenzy there. But a lot of these new players, I think, are just starting to engage in the Farm Bill, like the last couple of Farm Bills. So it's early days there. We have time for at least one more question. I am trying to see if I missed anyone in the back. Okay, yes. I don't want to have a bias towards the front because I can't see. Yeah.
There's a heard is that as the industry grows, the government is more interested in supporting the industry, especially in the UK, we're early on or something. But if you look at other industries that we're trying to solve sometimes for having, there is a chicken and egg problem, right? How do we get big without government support? And so if we wait until opportunities is at a threshold, then we'll get there. Then you might be waiting for the dough, as opposed to how do we accelerate this industry? So I'm just wondering how DOE or California governments, USDA thinks about sort of their role, not just sort of waiting for us big enough to support it, but realizing that we can't reach like a lot of general goals, development, climate change, pandemic risk, job creation, fill in the blank, unless this industry has a chance to flourish.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe I can quickly comment and then turn it over to colleagues here. But so I am a civil servant. I'm not part of the political decision-making, process that goes on in the DOE. But I do have a huge passion for early stage applied R&D, and I think that catalytic kinds of investments are the ones that can really change the way that these industries develop. So I'm hopeful that with the right framing here, that in terms of climate, and I do think. To the earlier question, I do think the climate thing is also a bipartisan issue, and many of the ways that we're going to address climate will be able to create jobs, and I think focusing on that piece here helps it be a bipartisan solution, and will help the Congress to see the value for the DOE in addressing emissions through this space, and so I think that being able to make those, maybe it doesn't become an investment the scale of all of our billions of dollars towards solar or wind, but I think having it as a piece in our climate toolbox is something that just makes a lot of sense from a pragmatic point of view to address climate change.
And I'll just say really quickly, to your point, Helena, like President Biden showed incredible leadership in making sure that focus on protein innovation and cultivating alternative sources of food were part of the executive order, right? PCAS, the President's Council on Science, I forget the full, even I don't know all the full acronyms, called out innovation and alternative proteins. USDA put it in our, future facing science and research strategy. So we are paying attention, right? But we operate in a dynamic political system. So we're hoping that, other parts of government will pay attention and enable us to move forward, right? So I think we're beginning to see this momentum, like I said, incorporating it into our strategies, inviting partners to the table, but we're in a limited budget environment, right? And so, those are robust conversations that I think are continuing to happen. But again, looking to the states, I think that's where we can see a lot of innovation, a lot of movement that can also be a huge spark for the federal government to say, okay, we can't let the states kind of shame us. We need to now act. So I think it's a multitude of kind of things, different things going on that can propel that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to invest more. We have to invest more, not only in research, but in market and creating markets. That's what we've done with solars, what we've done with EVs. And it takes a long time. To your point, Ari, it takes, you have to have a long-term vision and consistency in doing that. You have to find opportunities to create markets, which, whether it's requiring plant-based at hospitals and prisons. We spent $700 million to help get more healthier and plant-based kind of slow food movement and actually prepared foods at schools. But we have to also continue to increase the investments in research. The reality is that we do subsidize the meat dairy industry. It's heavily subsidized already. So they already have a huge market, then a huge market advantage on top of that. And so at the state level, I'm going to continue to push for more money in research, as well as opportunities that might arise in order to create a market advantage. The bill I have on tropical deforestation, that's an example. Like, if that prevents us from bringing in beef from Brazil, that creates a market advantage to other kinds of products that aren't contributing to that kind of deforestation. There's different angles to hit it with, because there's not, we can't just say, okay, everyone has to start, eating Impossible burgers, but there are ways we can do it where I think we can start to give some of these new companies a fighting chance. And so that's what I'm hopeful that we can try to do in the years ahead, invest more and more from the state level, but also give some kind of market spotlight on those companies. And it won't work if we do it from an angle of, oh, we're trying to help plant-based. It'll work if we're saying, hey, we have to, again, the climate change angle, the economic development angle. Those are the two, workforce development angle. Those are the angles I think that we'll have to approach to get more state funding, to give some fighting chance to some of the companies that are just trying to survive.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know we could go on all afternoon. I want to thank the panelists for a really great conversation. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. Thank you. I also want to thank Representative Sonia, is she still here? Also, thank you for beaming in. If you're interested in food policy, my newsletter might be of interest. It's called Food Fix. You can sign up at foodfix.co if you're wanting to nerd out about this stuff. Sometimes I include those charts that we mentioned from the Economic Research Service, which I'm not joking, they're really interesting. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.